The distant howl of a coyote carried across the desolate Nevada landscape as Zadie Armstrong clutched her worn leather journal to her chest, her voice rising soft and clear above the crackle of her small campfire. The song was an old one her mother had taught her, about sailors and distant shores, oddly out of place in this dusty stretch of land some 20 miles outside of Tonopah. But it was all she had to keep the crushing weight of solitude at bay. It was 1879, and the silver boom that had transformed this corner of Nevada into a bustling hub of activity had begun to cool. Still, it had been enough to draw Zadie west from Boston after her parents' passing left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The teaching position waiting in Tonopah promised a fresh start, if only she could complete this final leg of her journey. The stagecoach had broken an axle earlier that afternoon, the driver and the other passengers continuing on to seek help while Zadie volunteered to stay with their belongings. "Be back by nightfall," the driver had promised. But nightfall had come and gone, and now the vast darkness of the desert pressed in around her small fire like a living thing. So she sang, her voice gaining strength with each verse, not because she felt brave, but because singing was the only way to keep from surrendering to the fear that clawed at her throat. Nathan Zeller had not spoken more than 20 words in the last month, not since Frostburn Gulch. Not since he'd buried his partner and best friend after the mine collapse that had claimed 16 lives. He'd been tracking a small herd of Mustangs for 2 days, focusing on the physical demands of the work rather than the memories that haunted him whenever his mind grew quiet. The voice caught him by surprise, floating on the night air like a fragment of a dream. At first, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks, or perhaps his mind finally surrendering to the grief that he'd been outrunning. But as he guided his horse over the ridge, he saw the small campfire and the slight figure beside it. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle whoever was foolish enough to be camping alone in this unforgiving territory. As he drew closer, the singing grew clearer, a woman's voice, rich and resonant despite the slight tremor of fear he could detect beneath the melody. Zadie's song died in her throat when she spotted the silhouette of a rider approaching. Her hand moved instinctively to the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt, her only protection against the dangers her mother had warned her about before she'd embarked on this journey. "Hello, the camp," a deep voice called out from the darkness. "Mind if I approach? I mean no harm." Zadie swallowed hard, her fingers tight around the hidden pistol. "State your business, sir," she called back, proud that her voice remained steady. Nathan guided his horse into the circle of firelight, his weathered face partially obscured by several weeks' growth of beard. He removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Nathan Zeller, madam. I was tracking horses when I heard your singing. It's not safe for anyone to be alone out here, especially not a lady." Zadie studied the stranger carefully. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, and though his face was lined with exhaustion, his blue eyes held no malice that she could detect. The rifle in his saddle holster and the revolver at his hip marked him as a man prepared for the dangers of the territory, but he kept his hands where she could see them. "Zadie Armstrong," she replied after a moment. "The stagecoach suffered a broken axle. The driver and other passengers went ahead to fetch help, but they've not returned." Nathan frowned, glancing at the darkened trail. "They wouldn't make it back tonight, too dangerous in the dark. They'd wait for morning." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "If you've no objection, I'd better stay. All manner of predators prowling these parts after nightfall." Zadie's throat tightened. She'd hoped the driver would return, but deep down, she'd known it was unlikely. The prospect of spending the night alone in the wilderness had been terrifying, but was trusting this stranger any safer? "I've beans and coffee," Nathan offered, gesturing to his saddlebags. "And I'll keep my distance if it eases your mind." Something in his tone, a weariness that matched her own, made her decision. "The coffee would be welcome," she said, "and perhaps, Perhaps you might tell me about Tanapa while we wait. I'm to be the new schoolteacher there." A flicker of surprise crossed Nathan's face. Schoolteacher. He nodded slowly. Town could use some learning. Too many children running wild these days. He busied himself with retrieving a small pot from his pack, deliberately keeping space between them. As he prepared the coffee, Zadie found herself studying him more closely. His movements were efficient, practiced, suggesting years of self-sufficiency. Though he couldn't be much past 30, there was something in his eyes that spoke of having seen too much, endured too much. "You've been silent a long while," she observed softly as he handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "I can hear it in the way you choose your words, like they're unfamiliar tools." Nathan's hands stilled, his eyes meeting hers with startled intensity. "How could you know that?" Zadie offered a small, sad smile. "My father was the same way after he came back from the war. Words became precious to him, too valuable to waste." She wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. "That's why I was singing. Sometimes when there are no words, there's still music." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a crack in a carefully constructed wall. He settled back, staring into the fire. "It was a beautiful song. Reminded me of places I haven't thought about in years. Would you like to hear another?" Zadie asked, surprising herself with the offer. Nathan looked up, the firelight catching in his eyes. "I would, madam, very much." And so Zadie sang again, a gentle ballad about finding one's way home. This time, she sang not from fear, but from a strange sense of peace that had settled between them. Two strangers sharing a fire in the vast Nevada desert. When she finished, Nathan remained quiet for a long moment. "You have a gift," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion he seemed unaccustomed to expressing. "Tanapa doesn't deserve it, but they sure do need it." "And what about you, Mr. Zeller?" Zadie asked, emboldened by the intimacy that sometimes forms between strangers who meet in unusual circumstances. "What is it that you need?" The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Zadie thought he might not answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "I don't rightly know any more." Morning dawned clear and brilliant, the sun transforming the harsh landscape into a canvas of golds and reds. Nathan had kept watch most of the night, dozing occasionally, but always alert to any sounds that might signal danger. Zadie had slept fitfully, wrapped in the extra blanket he'd offered from his supplies. As she stirred awake, Nathan was already preparing a simple breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit. "Driver should be back soon," he said, nodding toward the trail. "I can hear horses approaching." Zadie hastily smoothed her hair and straightened her travel-worn dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "Thank you for staying," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't know what I would have done if no need for thanks," Nathan interrupted, his discomfort with gratitude evident. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. The West was unforgiving to those who made mistakes, and a lone woman by a campfire could have met a far different fate had someone else discovered her. The stagecoach driver appeared over the rise, accompanied by two other men and a wagon carrying tools and supplies. His relief at finding Zadie safe was palpable. "Miss Armstrong, thank the Lord, we got delayed in town, couldn't make it back before dark." He glanced warily at Nathan. "I see you had company." "Mr. Zeller was kind enough to stand guard," Zadie explained, gathering her belongings. "He's been a perfect gentleman." The driver nodded, though his expression remained suspicious. "Well, we're mighty grateful, mister." "We'll have the stage fixed in no time and get Miss Armstrong safely to Tanapa." Nathan stepped back, already retreating into himself. "I should be on my way. Those horses won't track themselves." He tipped his hat to Zadie. "Good luck with your teaching, Miss Armstrong." "Mr. Zeller," Zadie called as he turned to his horse. "Will I see you in Tanapa?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I doubt it, madam. I don't spend much time in towns these days." With that, he mounted his horse and rode off, disappearing into the vastness of the landscape. Zadie watched him go, an unexpected sense of loss settling in her chest. Somehow, in the span of a single night, the taciturn stranger had carved out a place in her thoughts that she couldn't easily dismiss. Tanapa welcomed Zadie with a mixture of curiosity and warmth. The town was larger than she'd expected, a testament to the silver that had drawn prospectors and entrepreneurs to this remote corner of Nevada. Boardwalks lined the main street, connecting an assortment of businesses: general store, saloon, hotel, a Sayers office, and the small schoolhouse that would be her domain. Mrs. Holbrook, the wife of the town's most prominent merchant, had arranged lodging for Zadie in a small but tidy room above the millinery shop. "Not what you're used to back east, I expect," the older woman commented as she showed Zadie the space, "but it's clean and private." "It's perfect," Zadie assured her, genuinely pleased with the room's simple comforts after weeks of travel. The schoolhouse, however, presented a more daunting challenge. It was a single room with rows of mismatched benches, a pot-bellied stove that had seen better days, and windows that rattled in their frames when the wind blew. The previous teacher had departed suddenly, leaving no lesson plans or materials beyond a few tattered McGuffey readers and a chipped slate board. 28 pupils, ages 6 to 16, the town mayor informed her proudly, as if presenting her with a great gift. "Some only come when their folks don't need them for chores, mind you, but they're good children, mostly." Zadie nodded, already cataloging the supplies she would need and calculating whether her modest savings would cover them. "When do you expect me to begin?" "Monday next," the mayor replied. "Gives you a few days to settle in. Town's planning a social Saturday evening, good chance for you to meet the families." As Zadie spent the next few days preparing the schoolhouse and creating lesson plans, she found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Nathan Zeller. She wondered where he was, whether he was still tracking those wild horses, and if he ever thought of the night they'd shared a campfire and she had sung for him. She chided herself for such fanciful thinking. The man had merely done his duty as any decent person would. Yet there had been something in his eyes when she sang, a momentary lightening of the burden he so clearly carried that had touched her deeply. Saturday evening arrived, and Zadie, dressed in her best gown, a modest blue creation that had seen better days, but still maintained an air of Eastern refinement. The town hall had been transformed with bunting and lanterns, a small group of local musicians providing lively tunes as families gathered to welcome the new schoolteacher. Zadie smiled and shook hands until her cheeks ached from the effort, memorizing names and faces, trying to match children to parents to better understand the community she would be serving. "Miss Armstrong," Mrs. Holbrook approached, towing a reluctant young man behind her. "This is my nephew, Frederick. He's just opened a law practice here and is in desperate need of civilized company." Frederick Holbrook was handsome in a conventional way, his suit well-tailored and his manners impeccable. He bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Miss Armstrong." "My aunt has spoken highly of you." "Mr. Holbrook," Zadie acknowledged with a polite nod. "I've only just arrived. Your aunt is being generous with her assessment." "Not at all," he replied smoothly. "It takes considerable courage to journey west alone. Most ladies of my acquaintance would never attempt such an adventure." Before Zadie could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading evening light. Even at a distance, Zadie recognized him instantly: Nathan Zeller, though he looked markedly different from the rough frontiersman she'd met in the desert. He'd shaved his beard, revealing a strong jawline, and his clothes, while still practical, were clean and pressed. The room had fallen oddly silent, conversations tapering off as people noticed his arrival. The mayor broke the tension, striding forward with forced joviality. "Zeller, didn't expect to see you here. Been 8 months since you've shown your face in town." Nathan removed his hat, his discomfort at being the center of attention obvious. "Sheriff Miller said there might be work. Thought I'd inquire." His eyes scanned the room until they found Zadie, and for a brief moment, something like relief crossed his features. "Well, we're celebrating our new schoolteacher tonight," the mayor said, gesturing toward Zadie. "Miss Armstrong just arrived from Boston." Nathan nodded. "We've met." A murmur of curiosity rippled through the crowd. Frederick Holbrook's hand tightened slightly on Zadie's elbow. "You know this man?" he asked, his tone suggesting that such an acquaintance might be questionable. Zadie straightened her spine. "Mr. Zeller was kind enough to stand guard when our stagecoach broke down outside of town." She stepped away from Frederick, moving toward Nathan with a genuine smile. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Zeller. I didn't expect you'd come to Tanapa after all." "Hadn't planned to," Nathan admitted, his voice low, "but plans change." Something in his tone made Zadie wonder what had truly brought him to town, but before she could ask, Mrs. Holbrook interjected herself between them. "Miss Armstrong, they're about to begin the dancing. Frederick is quite accomplished and has already requested your hand for the first set." Zadie hesitated, glancing at Nathan, who had already taken a step back. "Perhaps later, Mr. Zeller," she suggested, unwilling to be rude to the Holbrooks but equally reluctant to let Nathan disappear again. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps." But his tone suggested he had no intention of remaining for the dancing. True to her prediction, by the time Zadie had completed 2 sets with Frederick and politely declined a third, Nathan was nowhere to be seen. Disappointed but not surprised, she made her excuses to the Holbrooks and slipped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was cool, stars blazing in a clarity she'd never witnessed in Boston. Zadie wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and walked a short distance from the hall, relishing the momentary solitude. "You sing even when you're not afraid." The voice startled her, though she recognized it instantly. Nathan stepped from the shadows near the hitching post, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I beg your pardon. At the social," Nathan clarified. "You were humming along with the music, didn't even seem to notice you were doing it." Zadie felt a blush warm her cheeks. An old habit. "My mother said I sang before I spoke." "It's not a criticism," Nathan said quickly. "It's nice." They stood in silence for a moment, the distance between them filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Zadie gathered her courage. "Why did you come to Tanapa, Mr. Zeller? Truly." Nathan looked away, his profile sharp against the night sky. "Been thinking about what you said by the campfire, about needing something. Figured maybe it was time to stop running from folks. And the work you mentioned to the mayor, sheriffs looking for a deputy." Nathan shrugged. "I've handled a gun before, thought I might be of use." Zadie studied him carefully. "Is that what you want, to be a lawman?" "One doesn't factor much into it," Nathan replied. "It's work that needs doing." "There's more to life than just doing what needs doing, Mr. Zeller." Nathan turned to face her fully, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. "Like what, Miss Armstrong? Singing songs by a campfire? Dancing with lawyers in fancy suits?" The bitterness in his tone caught her off guard. "Like finding joy," she answered softly. "Like connecting with people instead of just existing alongside them." Nathan fell silent, his jaw working as if wrestling with words he couldn't quite form. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "I should let you get back to your social. Mr. Holbrook will be wondering where you've gone." "Mr. Holbrook has no claim on my time," Zadie replied, more sharply than she'd intended. Softening her tone, she added, "I'd rather talk with you if you're willing." For a long moment, Nathan seemed to wage some internal battle. Then, with a nod that might have been resignation or decision, he gestured to a bench near the edge of the town square. "I'm not much for conversation, but I can listen well enough." And so, under the vast Nevada sky, Zadie Armstrong found herself sharing the story of her life with a man she barely knew, but somehow trusted implicitly. She told him about losing her parents to influenza within weeks of each other, about discovering the family finances were in ruins, about choosing to journey west rather than accept her cousin's grudging offer of marriage and security. In turn, Nathan gradually revealed fragments of his own history growing up on a struggling ranch in Montana, losing his parents young, drifting through the West, taking whatever work he could find. He spoke haltingly, as if each word had to be excavated from some deep place within him, but he spoke. What he didn't mention was Frostburn Gulch or the mine collapse that had claimed his friend's life. But Zadie sensed the edges of that unspoken pain in the way his voice sometimes faltered, in the shadows that crossed his face when certain subjects arose. The music from the social had long since faded when they finally rose from the bench. "I've kept you too long," Nathan said, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of their extended conversation. "No," Zadie replied simply. "You haven't." She studied his face in the moonlight, searching for words to express the strange connection she felt to this quiet, wounded man. "Will I see you again, Mr. Zeller?" "Nathan," he corrected gently. "And yes, I expect you will. Town's not so big you can avoid anyone for long." A wry smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. "Besides, the schoolhouse roof leaks something fierce. Noticed it when I rode past yesterday. Might need fixing before the rains come." Zadie smiled, recognizing the offer beneath the practical observation. "I would appreciate that. Nathan?" His name felt intimate on her tongue, a small liberty that seemed significant in the quiet darkness. "Good night, then." "Good night, Miss Armstrong." "Zadie," she corrected, matching his earlier informality. "If we're to be friends, you should use my given name." Nathan nodded, a solemnity in the gesture that suggested he understood the weight of the exchange. "Good night, Zadie." As she watched him walk away, Zadie felt a curious lightness in her chest, a sensation of possibility that had been absent for longer than she cared to admit. Whatever had brought Nathan Zeller to Tonopah, she was suddenly, fiercely glad of it. The Monday morning bell rang clear across the town, summoning Tonopah's children to their first day with the new teacher. Zadie stood at the schoolhouse door, her anxiety hidden behind a welcoming smile as students filed in, some eager, others clearly reluctant. By noon, Zadie's throat was raw from projecting her voice over the chatter, and shuffling of nearly 30 pupils ranging from barely school age to teenagers who towered over her. The older boys, particularly, tested her authority with whispered comments and deliberate inattention. When the lunch hour finally arrived, Zadie dismissed the children with relief, sinking into her chair as the last of them raced out the door. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her resolve for the afternoon session. A knock at the open doorway startled her. Nathan stood there, hat in hand, a slightly sheepish expression on his face. "Brought you something," he said, stepping inside and placing a package wrapped in brown paper on her desk. "Noticed you didn't stop for a midday meal." Zadie unwrapped the package to find a sandwich, an apple, and a small jar of preserves. "This is most thoughtful," she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "But how did you know?" "Sheriff's office has a good view of the square," Nathan explained. "Saw everyone else head home or to the cafe, but you stayed put." He glanced around the schoolroom, taking in the carefully arranged desks and the educational charts Zadie had spent the weekend creating. "How's your first day?" Zadie sighed, her composure slipping slightly. "Challenging." "The younger children are eager enough, but the older boys..." She shook her head. "They see little value in education when the mines and ranches offer immediate employment." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Same when I was their age. Couldn't see the point in books when there was work to be done." He hesitated, then added, "Might help if they had something to look forward to, something that speaks to them." "What would have spoken to you at that age?" Zadie asked, curious. A rare smile crossed Nathan's face. "Stories about real things. Exploration, survival, building things." He gestured vaguely. "Not poetry about flowers and such." Zadie laughed, the sound surprising both of them with its warmth. "I'll keep that in mind, though I make no promises about eliminating poetry entirely." Nathan's smile deepened, transforming his face into something approaching handsome. "Wouldn't expect you to, just a thought." He took a step back toward the door. Should let you eat in peace. Sheriff's expecting me back. So you took the deputy position? For now, Nathan confirmed. Temporary arrangement while Sheriff Miller recovers from his fall. Before Zadie could respond, a commotion erupted in the schoolyard, shouting and the unmistakable sounds of a fight. She hurried to the window, dismayed to see two of her oldest students rolling in the dust, while others formed a circle around them. Without hesitation, Nathan strode outside, Zadie following close behind. He waded into the fray with calm authority, separating the combatants with firm but gentle hands. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying a quiet command that immediately silenced the onlookers. This isn't how men settle differences. The boys, James Tucker and William Bennett, glowered at each other but stopped struggling against Nathan's grip. "He said my pa's a thief." James spat, his young face flushed with righteous anger. "Said he stole claims that weren't his." William, sporting a rapidly swelling eye, shot back. "It's true. Everyone knows the Tuckers jumped the Martinez claim after the fever took them." "I said enough," Nathan repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "Whatever quarrel is between your fathers isn't yours to settle with fists." He looked between the boys. "You both disrespected your teacher by fighting on school grounds." The boys had the grace to look abashed, though their anger clearly still simmered. Zadie stepped forward, assuming her role as authority figure despite her private gratitude for Nathan's intervention. "Thank you, Deputy Zeller." She addressed the gathered students with her sternest expression. "Everyone inside. Lunch hour is over." As the children filed back into the schoolhouse, Nathan detained the two fighters with a hand on each shoulder. "You'll both apologize to Miss Armstrong," he instructed. "And then you'll stay after school to clean the classroom as recompense for disturbing her peace." The boys mumbled apologies, their resentment evident but their respect for the new deputy apparently sufficient to ensure compliance. Zadie accepted with appropriate gravity, then watched as they trudged inside to join their classmates. "Thank you," she said quietly to Nathan when they were alone. "I fear I might not have commanded the same respect." "You will," Nathan assured her. "Just takes time for them to learn you mean what you say." He studied her face for a moment, his expression softening. "You look tired. Singing's easier than teaching, I expect." "Both require breath control," Zadie replied with a small smile. "But yes, teaching is certainly more demanding than I anticipated." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I should let you get back to it." He started to turn away, then paused. "That roof still needs fixing. Could come by after you dismiss the children, take a look at it." "I'd appreciate that," Zadie said, suddenly reluctant to return to her classroom and end their conversation. Perhaps you might stay for supper afterward, as thanks for your help. Nothing elaborate, but I'm told I make a passable stew." Something like surprise flickered across Nathan's face, followed by a warmth that transformed his features. "I'd like that, thank you." As Zadie watched him walk away, she found herself already looking forward to the evening with an anticipation that had little to do with the practical matter of fixing a leaky roof. The weeks that followed established a pattern that gradually became the framework of Zadie's life in Tanapa. Her days were consumed by teaching, her evenings often spent preparing lessons or grading assignments. But increasingly, Nathan found reasons to be near the schoolhouse repairs that needed attention. Updates about town safety that might concern the children, occasional gifts of fresh game when his hunting was successful. Their suppers together became a regular occurrence, first once a week, then twice, until it seemed the most natural thing in the world for Nathan to appear at her door most evenings, sometimes with food to contribute, other times simply with his quiet presence and increasingly easy conversation. The town noticed, of course. Tanapa was too small for anything to escape observation, especially something as noteworthy as the growing friendship between the reserved deputy and the Eastern schoolteacher. Gossip ranged from benign speculation to more pointed comments about propriety, particularly from Mrs. Holbrook, who had clearly hoped to match Zadie with her nephew. "People are talking," Mrs. Holbrook informed Zadie one afternoon as they both selected fabric at the general store. "A young woman in your position must be especially mindful of her reputation." Zadie measured out a length of calico for new classroom curtains, keeping her expression neutral. "Mr. Zeller is a friend and has been exceptionally helpful with repairs to the schoolhouse. I see nothing improper in expressing gratitude for his assistance." Mrs. Holbrook sniffed disapprovingly. "There are those who wonder about his past. He appeared in town after that dreadful business at Frostburn Gulch, barely speaks of it, which some find suspicious." Zadie's hands stilled on the fabric. Nathan had never mentioned Frostburn Gulch to her, though she'd sensed there was something significant he kept carefully guarded. "I'm sure Mr. Zeller has his reasons for privacy," she said carefully. "As do we all. My nephew Frederick has expressed particular interest in your welfare," Mrs. Holbrook continued, changing tactics. "He's a man of excellent prospects, well educated from a good family." "Mr. Holbrook seems a fine gentleman," Zadie acknowledged, "but I'm not seeking a romantic attachment at present. My focus is on establishing myself as a teacher." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "My dear, I don't wish to seem interfering. It's just that life out here can be difficult for a woman alone. Security is not something to dismiss lightly." Zadie thought of Nathan, of his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his rare smiles transformed his face into something approaching joy. "There are many forms of security, Mrs. Holbrook," she replied. "Not all involve advantageous marriages." That evening, as Nathan helped her hang the new curtains in the schoolhouse, Zadie found herself watching him more closely than usual, wondering about the shadows in his past and why he kept them so carefully hidden. "Mrs. Holbrook mentioned Frostburn Gulch today," she said finally, deciding that directness was preferable to continued speculation. "She implied there was something significant about your connection to it." Nathan's hands stilled on the curtain rod, his back to her. For a long moment he said nothing, and Zadie feared she'd overstepped. Then, slowly, he finished securing the rod and turned to face her. 16 men died there," he said, his voice stripped of emotion. "Mining accident, shaft collapse. I was one of the few who made it out." Zadie's heart ached at the flat tone, recognizing it as the voice of someone who had moved beyond grief into a place where feelings were too dangerous to acknowledge. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Was someone close to you among those lost?" Nathan moved to the window, staring out at the darkening landscape. "My best friend, Thomas Reed, known him since we were boys in Montana." He swallowed hard. "He had a wife, 2 little girls. I was the one who told them he wasn't coming home." Zadie crossed the room to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but not quite. "That's a terrible burden to bear." "Should have been me," Nathan said, so quietly she almost missed it. "I was deeper in the shaft. Tom came looking for me when the timbers started creaking. Got me out, but couldn't save himself." Understanding bloomed within Zadie the reason for his silence, his isolation, his reluctance to form connections. "You blame yourself for his death." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Not a matter of blame, just truth." "Nathan." Zadie touched his arm gently, compelling him to look at her. "Thomas made his choice. A choice born of friendship and courage. Diminishing that choice by blaming yourself dishonors his sacrifice." Anger flashed in Nathan's eyes, quickly replaced by pain so raw it made Zadie's breath catch. "You don't understand. His girls don't have a father because of me. Jenny doesn't have a husband. What am I supposed to do with that?" "Live," Zadie answered simply. "Live fully, honorably, kindly as I suspect Thomas would have wanted. And perhaps find a way to help his family, if that eases your heart." Nathan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "I send money," he admitted after a moment. "Every month. They think it's from the mining company, compensation." He looked away. "Jenny wouldn't take it if she knew it was from me," she said. "When I told her about Tom, she said I should have been the one who died." The pain in those words cut through Zadie like a physical blow. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, clasping it between both of hers. "She spoke from grief, not truth," she said fiercely. "And she was wrong, Nathan. So wrong." For a moment, they stood frozen in that intimate connection, Zadie's smaller hands wrapped around his calloused one, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that surprised them both. Then, slowly, Nathan's free hand came up to cover hers, completing the circuit between them. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "About any of this? About me?" Zadie's heart hammered in her chest, the answer rising to her lips before she could consider its wisdom. "Because when I sing, you listen as if it's saving your life. Because when you smile, it feels like a gift you've forgotten how to give. Because I think, perhaps, we both know what it is to be alone in a crowd." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a softening, a surrender. Slowly, as if giving her every opportunity to pull away, he raised a hand to her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "Zadie," he said, her name a question and an answer all at once. And then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him, she couldn't be sure who moved first, only that the contact was as inevitable as sunrise. His lips were surprisingly soft against hers, the kiss tentative at first, then deepening as she responded with a fervor that startled them both. When they finally broke apart, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered, though he made no move to release her. "I'm glad you did," Zadie replied, her own voice scarcely audible. "I've wanted you to for weeks." Nathan drew back slightly, searching her face with wonder. I'm not what someone like you should want, Zadie. I've got nothing to offer but complications." "You underestimate yourself," she countered, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw. "And you certainly underestimate what I want." A noise from outside voices approaching the schoolhouse broke the moment. Nathan stepped back reluctantly, his expression conflicted. "I should go. People will talk if we're found here alone after dark." "Let them talk," Zadie said impulsively, then sighed at his concerned look. "But you're right, of course. My position here requires a certain discretion." She straightened her skirts, trying to compose herself. "Will you come tomorrow, for supper?" Nathan nodded, a new light in his eyes despite his evident struggle with propriety. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "And Zadie," he hesitated, then continued softly, "thank you for listening, for understanding." As he slipped out the back door of the schoolhouse, Zadie pressed her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss, and knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, her life had irrevocably changed. The following weeks brought a transformation in Nathan that fascinated and delighted Zadie. Though still reserved with others, with her, he gradually opened like a flower turning toward the sun, revealing facets of himself that had been buried beneath grief and guilt for too long. She discovered his dry sense of humor, his surprising knowledge of literature, gleaned from long winters with only books for company, his talent for whittling delicate figures from wood, and his unshakable sense of justice that made him an excellent deputy despite his reluctance to wear the badge. Their evenings together became the cornerstone of Zadie's life in Tanapa, simple meals followed by quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. Sometimes, Nathan read aloud from one of Zadie's books, his deep voice giving new dimension to familiar words. Other times, at his shy request, she sang for him, watching as the tension eased from his shoulders and the shadows receded from his eyes. They were careful in public, maintaining a friendly but proper distance that nonetheless failed to quell the town's gossip. Frederick Holbrook made his disapproval particularly evident, his once friendly overtures to Zadie cooling to formal politeness whenever they encountered each other. "You should know," he told her one afternoon, detaining her after a town council meeting where the school budget had been discussed, "that Zeller's position as deputy is unlikely to continue once Sheriff Miller recovers. The council has concerns about his suitability." Zadie straightened, immediately defensive. On what grounds? Deputy Zeller has served the town admirably. Frederick's expression was a mixture of concern and condescension. There are questions about his stability after Frostburn Gulch. Several council members feel a man with his history might not be the best choice for a position of authority. His history, Zadie repeated, her voice sharpening. You mean the trauma of surviving a tragedy that claimed 16 lives, including his best friend, that history. Miss Armstrong, Frederick said, lowering his voice, I'm simply concerned for your welfare. Zeller is known to be a solitary man with a troubled past. Your association with him has not gone unnoticed, and it could potentially compromise your standing in the community. Anger flared in Zadie's chest. Mr. Holbrook, while I appreciate your concern, my personal associations are my own affair. Deputy Zeller is a man of integrity who has shown nothing but respect toward me and dedication to this town. People talk, Miss Armstrong, Frederick persisted. A schoolteacher must be above reproach. Then perhaps people should find more worthwhile topics of conversation, Zadie replied crisply. Good day, Mr. Holbrook. She departed with her head high, but Frederick's warning lingered uncomfortably. That evening, when Nathan arrived for their usual supper, she shared the conversation. He's not wrong, Nathan admitted after listening intently. About the deputy position, at least. Miller's improving. He'll be back within the month, and there's been talk. What will you do? Zadie asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Will you stay in Tanapa? Nathan was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the small fire in the stove. Hadn't thought much beyond the next day since Frostburn, he finally said. Then I heard you singing by that campfire and something. Woke up inside me. He met her gaze directly. I'll stay as long as you want me to, Zadie. The simple declaration, delivered without embellishment, but with absolute sincerity, took Zadie's breath away. I want you to, she whispered, reaching for his hand across the small table. I want you to stay, Nathan. His fingers tightened around hers, his eyes never leaving her face. Then I will. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. As spring yielded to summer, Tanapa experienced a renewed boom with the discovery of a rich new silver vein in the northern mines. The town swelled with newcomers, miners, merchants, and fortune-seekers of all kinds. With the increased population came increased demands on the makeshift law enforcement. And despite Frederick Holbrook's predictions, Sheriff Miller requested that Nathan continue as deputy even after his own return to duty. The schoolhouse, too, saw an influx of new students as families arrived to seek their fortunes. Zadie found herself teaching nearly 40 children, the small building straining to contain their energy and curiosity. With the school board's reluctant approval, she instituted an innovative system of peer teaching, where older students helped instruct younger ones in basics, while she provided more advanced lessons to those ready for them. To her surprise and gratification, some of her most challenging students became her most dedicated helpers under this arrangement. James Tucker, whose fistfight had been one of her earliest disciplinary challenges, revealed a particular talent for explaining mathematics to younger children. You've worked miracles with that boy, Nathan commented one evening as they walked together along the creek that ran behind the town, one of their favorite places for private conversation. His father says he's talking about becoming a teacher himself someday. Zadie smiled, warmed by the praise but more so by the evident pride in Nathan's voice. Over the months, he had become an unexpected ally in her educational mission, sometimes visiting the school to demonstrate practical skills like map reading or basic carpentry that captured the interest of even the most reluctant learners. Children respond to being treated as capable, she replied, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow as they walked. James needed responsibility more than discipline. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Like most of us, I expect. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Zadie found herself humming softly, an old lullaby that had been playing in her mind throughout the day. I never tire of hearing you, Nathan said, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk. Sometimes I think it's your voice that's kept me here more than anything else. Zadie stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Is that all? She asked, a teasing note in her voice that nevertheless concealed a genuine question. Nathan's expression grew serious as he took both her hands in his. No, he said simply. It's your courage, your kindness, the way you see goodness in everyone, even those who have forgotten it's there. He took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for what came next. It's that I love you, Zadie Armstrong, more than I believed I could ever love anyone again. Zadie's heart soared at the words she'd hoped for, but hadn't dared expect. I love you too, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her throat. I think I have since that first night by the campfire, when you listened to me sing as if it was the most important sound in the world. It was, Nathan said, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. Is your voice. It woke something in me I thought had died at frostburn. Made me remember there was still beauty in the world worth living for. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the fading light. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he admitted, opening his palm to reveal a simple ring with a small pearl set in silver. It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it, as my wife. Zadie stared at the ring, then up at Nathan's face, her vision blurring with unexpected tears. Are you certain? She whispered. You know what people will say, that I'm throwing myself away on a man with a troubled past, that you could do better than a plain schoolteacher with no family connections. Nathan shook his head, a rare full smile transforming his features. Let them talk, he said, echoing her words from months before. I know what I want, Zadie Armstrong. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up to your singing and go to sleep holding you close. I want to be worthy of the man you already believe me to be. Yes, Zadie said, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. Yes, Nathan Zeller, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows, Zadie knew that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, her voice, and his strength creating a harmony neither could achieve alone. Their wedding took place on a perfect October morning. The aspens in the hills surrounding Tonopah turned to gold by the autumn light. Despite Frederick Holbrook's continued disapproval and his aunt's thinly veiled disappointment, much of the town turned out to witness the union of their schoolteacher and deputy sheriff. Sheriff Miller stood as Nathan's best man, his gruff exterior softening as he watched the couple exchange vows in the small church that doubled as a community meeting hall on weekdays. Zadie, wearing a new dress of deep blue silk that Nathan had insisted on ordering from San Francisco, despite her protests about the expense, sang a verse from Amazing Grace as part of the ceremony, her clear voice filling the small space and bringing tears to more than a few eyes. Never heard anything so beautiful, Sheriff Miller commented at the reception afterward, his voice rough with emotion he'd deny if questioned directly. No wonder you finally started talking again after you met her, Zeller. Nathan, more relaxed and openly happy than anyone in Tonopah could recall seeing him, kept Zadie's hand firmly in his throughout the celebration. Some things are worth finding words for, he replied, his eyes never leaving his bride's face. Their first home together was a small cabin on the edge of town that Nathan had been quietly renovating for months, unbeknownst to Zadie. What it lacked in size, it made up for in thoughtful touches, bookshelves built to hold her growing collection, a small piano purchased secondhand from a family returning east, windows positioned to capture the best light for reading and sewing. It's perfect, Zadie breathed as Nathan carried her across the threshold that evening. When did you find time to do all this? Mornings, mostly, Nathan admitted, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Before my shifts, wanted it to be right for you. Zadie turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. It's more than right. It's home. She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Though I might need a demonstration of where everything is, particularly the bedroom. Nathan's laugh, once so rare, came easily now. Happy to oblige, Mrs. Zeller, he murmured, bending to kiss her with a passion that had only deepened since their first tentative embrace in the schoolhouse months before. Later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Zadie rested her head on Nathan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. I never expected this, she confessed softly. When I came west, I was simply seeking independence, a place to build a life on my own terms. Nathan's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. And instead, you got saddled with a broken-down cowboy with more ghosts than prospects. Zadie propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him sternly despite the smile tugging at her lips. I got exactly what I needed, Nathan Zeller. A partner who respects my independence while offering support when I need it. A man who listens when I speak and hears what I don't say. She leaned down to kiss him softly. A husband who loves me completely, as I love him. As winter settled over Tanapa, bringing shorter days and long, cold nights, the newlyweds established rhythms and routines that strengthened their bond. Zadie continued teaching, her innovative methods earning recognition from educational authorities in Carson City. Nathan, finding unexpected satisfaction in his role as deputy, began studying law under Frederick Holbrook's reluctant tutelage, the two men establishing a wary professional respect despite their personal differences. In the evenings, their small home became a gathering place for a select circle of friends, Sheriff Miller and his wife, the young doctor who had recently established a practice in town, and his family, several of Zadie's fellow teachers from neighboring communities. Music was often at the center of these gatherings, with Zadie playing the piano and singing while others contributed whatever instruments they possessed: a fiddle, a harmonica, occasionally a guitar. Nathan, though he claimed no musical talent himself, loved these evenings with a passion that sometimes surprised him. Watching Zadie at the piano, her face alight with joy as she led their friends in song, he often found himself overcome with gratitude for the twist of fate that had led him to her campfire that night. You're staring again, Zadie murmured one evening as she joined him by the fire after their guests had departed. Can't help it, Nathan replied unapologetically, pulling her onto his lap. Still can't quite believe you're mine. Zadie settled against him with a contented sigh. Believe it, she said, her hand coming up to caress his cheek. I'm not going anywhere. She hesitated, then added softly, though our family might be growing sooner than we planned. Nathan went very still, his arms tightening around her. Zadie, he questioned, his voice barely audible. Are you saying? She nodded, a mixture of nervousness and joy in her expression. Dr. Marshall confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Nathan, in early summer. For a moment, Nathan seemed unable to respond, emotions warring across his face: joy, fear, wonder, and something deeper that Zadie couldn't quite name. Then, to her astonishment, he buried his face against her shoulder, his body shaking with silent sobs. Nathan, she whispered, alarmed. What's wrong? I thought you'd be happy. I am, he managed, his voice muffled against her dress. God, Zadie, I am. It's just... He raised his head, his eyes wet but his expression transformed with a joy so intense it was almost painful to witness. After Tom died, I thought I'd never deserve happiness again, thought I'd live and die alone, carrying what happened. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. And now this, a family, our family. Zadie covered his hand with her own, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had survived so much pain only to embrace joy with such wholehearted wonder. Our family, she echoed. A new beginning. As Zadie's pregnancy progressed, Nathan's protective instincts intensified, sometimes to the point of gentle amusement from Sheriff Miller and outright exasperation from Zadie herself. Nathan, I am perfectly capable of walking to the schoolhouse without assistance," she insisted one spring morning as he hovered anxiously nearby. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, often while continuing to work in fields or factories. Teaching a group of children is hardly comparable. Nathan frowned, eyeing her expanding midsection with concern. Those women weren't my wife, and they weren't carrying my child. Zadie softened, recognizing the fear beneath his overprotectiveness. I promise to be careful, she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. And I'll send one of the older children to fetch you if I feel even slightly unwell. This compromise seemed to satisfy him. Though Zadie noticed, he found excuses to pass by the schoolhouse more frequently than his duties strictly required. As her due date approached, the school board reluctantly agreed to Zadie's proposal that she train an assistant to take over her classes temporarily after the birth. To everyone's surprise, she selected Mary Tucker, James's older sister, who had recently completed her own education and shown an aptitude for working with children. The Tuckers? Nathan questioned when she told him of her choice. Won't that cause talk, given James's past disciplinary issues? Mary is intelligent, dedicated, and needs the opportunity, Zadie replied simply. And James has become one of my best students. I believe in giving people second chances, as someone once gave you. Nathan's expression softened into the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. Have I told you today that I love you, Zadie Zeller? You have, she replied, resting her hands on her rounded belly where their child had been particularly active that day. But I never tire of hearing it. Their son, Thomas Reed Zeller, arrived on a sweltering July morning after a labor that tested even Zadie's considerable courage. Nathan remained by her side throughout, his quiet strength and unwavering support belying the terror he felt as he watched his wife endure pain he could neither share nor ease. When the squalling infant was finally placed in Zadie's arms, her exhausted face transformed with a joy that Nathan knew would be etched in his memory forever. He's perfect, she whispered, gazing down at the red-faced, dark-haired bundle. Look what we made, Nathan. Nathan knelt beside the bed, one hand gently touching his son's tiny fist, the other clasping Zadie's fingers. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For him, for everything. Zadie's eyes filled with tears of joy and exhaustion. I think we should call him Thomas, she said softly. After your friend, if that would be all right with you. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. You do that. Name him after Tom? I would, Zadie confirmed. So your friend's name lives on, and so our son carries the legacy of a man brave enough to save others at the cost of his own life. Nathan could only nod, words failing him as they sometimes still did in moments of overwhelming emotion. But Zadie understood, as she always had, reading in his eyes what he couldn't express aloud. Sing to him, Nathan requested later that evening as they sat together in the quiet of their home, Zadie cradling the sleeping infant while Nathan watched them both with wonder. I want his first day in the world to have your voice in it. And so Zadie sang, her voice softer than usual but no less beautiful, a lullaby about guardian angels watching over sleeping children. As the melody filled their small home, Nathan closed his eyes, imprinting this moment in his memory his wife's voice, his son's peaceful breathing, the overwhelming sense of having been granted a gift far greater than he had ever dared to hope for. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's love of music. By the time he was 2, Tanapa had changed substantially from the rough mining town Zadie had first encountered. The silver boom had stabilized into steady production, bringing more families and more permanent structures a proper town hall, a larger school building that Zadie now administered as headmistress, a small hospital where Dr. Marshall trained a staff of nurses. Nathan, having completed his legal studies under Frederick Hallbrook's guidance, their relationship having evolved into a grudging mutual respect, established a small practice focused primarily on helping miners and their families navigate claims, contracts, and occasional disputes with the mining companies. He continued to serve as deputy when needed, but his legal work increasingly took precedence. Strange to think how different things might have been. He commented to Zadie one evening as they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard. "If I hadn't heard you singing that night, if I'd ridden on instead of stopping." Zadie reached for his hand, her fingers automatically finding the wedding band she'd placed there nearly 3 years earlier. "I've never believed that was chance," she said thoughtfully. "You were meant to find me, just as I was meant to come west." Nathan raised her hand to his lips. "For once, I won't argue with your romantic notions," he teased gently, "because I can't imagine any other path that would have brought me this much happiness." As they watched their son's delighted exploration of the world around him, a familiar peace settled between them, the quiet certainty of a love that had healed old wounds, created new life, and promised many more years of harmony to come. 5 years to the day after Nathan had first found Zadie singing by a lonely campfire, they stood together on the porch of their home, now expanded to accommodate their growing family. Thomas, nearly 4, sat on the steps whittling a small piece of wood under his father's watchful eye, while 2-year-old Elizabeth slept against Zadie's shoulder, her dark curls so like her mother's tumbling around her cherubic face. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," Nathan said, his arm around Zadie's waist as they watched the sun setting over the hills. "Sometimes feels like yesterday I heard you singing that sailor's song. And sometimes it feels like I've known you my entire life," Zadie replied, leaning into his embrace. "As if everything before was just preparation for finding you." Nathan smiled, the expression coming easily to him now after years of happiness that had gradually eased the shadows of his past. "Have I told you today that I love you, Zadie Zeller?" "You have," she answered, the familiar exchange a cherished ritual between them, "but I never tire of hearing it." As the last light faded from the sky, Thomas abandoned his whittling to join them, pressing against his father's side with the easy confidence of a child who has never known anything but love and security. "Papa, tell the story about how you found Mama singing," he requested, his young voice earnest. The one where her voice made the silence go away. Nathan exchanged a warm glance with Zadie over their son's head. "Well," he began, his deep voice gentle in the gathering dusk. "It was a night much like this one, with stars just beginning to appear in the sky." And as Nathan recounted their beginning, embellishing slightly for Thomas's benefit, but keeping the heart of the tale true, Zadie began to hum softly, the same melody that had drawn a lonely cowboy to her fire on a night when they both needed saving. The sound wrapped around them like an embrace, a reminder of how a single act of courage singing into the darkness when fear threatened to overwhelm had changed not just 2 lives, but created 3 more, spinning out into a future neither could have imagined when they first met on that starlit night in the Nevada desert. Elizabeth stirred against Zadie's shoulder, her small face turning toward the sound of her mother's humming as if drawn by an invisible thread. Nathan paused in his storytelling, watching as his daughter's eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on Zadie's face with a smile of pure recognition and love. In that moment, surrounded by the family that had grown from their unexpected meeting, Nathan and Zadie shared a look of profound understanding that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest acts of courage, and that love, once awakened, continues to echo long after the first note fades away.